Hello, I'm Anthony. Today I want to talk about a subject that's had a huge impact on not just my musical life, but pretty much every aspect of my life, and that's my autism. I have a condition that used to be called Asperger's syndrome. It's subsequently been renamed to Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. Now, a little bit later in this video, I'm going to talk about a lot of the symptoms that manifest in me that might help you to identify whether or not you have this condition, because I only discovered it about 3 years ago, and discovering that this is actually the way that many other people feel as well has been of huge benefit to me. But we'll get onto all of that later. Firstly, I want to ask you this question, this one simple question. When somebody says to you, the best thing that you can do as a musician is to play with other musicians, how does that make you feel? The way that I answer that question is absolutely no way, not a chance in hell. Furthermore, I don't even want to play with other musicians. I don't feel jealous of people who do play with other musicians. It's simply not something that I would even consider doing. In fact, it would be the wrong question to ask me, do you want to play with other musicians? Because I would say, I don't really understand the question, because that's just not a possibility. I don't think that way. I've been a musician for 37 years. I first picked up the guitar when I was 16 years old, and I've never been in a band. Now, I'm subscribed to a lot of musicians on YouTube. I watch a lot of content, the likes of Rick Beato, That Pedal Show, Tom Bukovac, Rhett Shull, lots of great channels that I really enjoy watching. Those that I've named, plus 20 others, absolutely without exception, every single one of them, you'll be able to find a video where at some point they say the best thing that you can do is to play with other musicians. And yet here I am telling you that that's simply not possible. I can't do that. I used to think it was simple social anxiety. I would do Google searches for fear of public spaces, fear of leaving the house, all sorts of community-based or socially based conditions. And I would often get channeled down the routes of the likes of agoraphobia. And I knew that that didn't describe me. I actually discovered that I was autistic about 3 years ago, watching a nature documentary. My wife and I were watching this program called Spring Watch, and the presenter, completely out of the blue, started talking about the fact that he had what was then called Asperger's syndrome, and he went through a checklist of all of the various things that characterized this condition in him. And Pauline and I looked at each other and we go, oh my God, he's just described me. It was absolutely unbelievable. From that point onwards, I felt this huge weight had been lifted off me, ran off to the internet, typed the search in, completed did the NHS test, the do you think you have ASD, and just absolutely knocked it out of the park. But the effect that this condition has is pretty far reaching. And some of those consequences leave me in this kind of sense of turmoil. Because if I'm not going to play with other musicians, there are lots of other aspects of being a musician that suddenly become redundant. Let me give you 2 examples. The first example is ear training, the ability to identify a chord or a sequence of notes and to be able to play those notes back correctly. Secondly, and this is specifically related to the guitar, but it really extends to all musical instruments, knowing the entire fretboard, being able to play all of the instances of A flat everywhere on the fretboard instantly, being able to switch between various keys or modes fluidly. All of those things are largely related to playing with other people, to interacting in real time with other people in a social environment, or possibly even a professional environment if you're a professional musician. Since none of that matters a jot to me because I'm never going to do it, what's the incentive for doing those things? See, fundamentally, I'm a songwriter. Take a look at my YouTube channel name. Now, I named this channel before I knew that I was autistic. What I did know, though, was that I preferred my own company and I had no interest in writing music with other people. I wanted to create a channel that focused on that. It's actually something that I've never really doubled down on. There's very little content on my channel about my insular nature, but I had this moment of epiphany yesterday when I realized that many of the things that trouble me about feeling bad at my lack of technical competence, my ability to play fluidly over the guitar, they're all actually a function of not playing with other people. Now, if there's no chance that I'm ever going to play with other people, maybe I just need to let those things go. And so I'm starting to formulate a new plan. I'm interested in stretching myself, particularly on the guitar. I want to get better at playing the instrument so that I have a wider palette of sounds available to me when I come to write the songs. But what I don't need is the ability to improvise instantly, because I have all the time I need to be able to work out those chord changes or those scale patterns or which notes sound good. Even if I just kind of stagger around blindly in the dark for half an hour, eventually I'm going to come across a melody that sounds good. So if the most important thing to you is actually the song, then the question becomes, what technical skills do you need in order to be able to accomplish that task? The moment of revelation I had yesterday, which finally convinced me to make this video, is that this is the be-all and end-all of my technical plan. I don't need to concentrate on the things that are focused on me interacting with other human beings if that's not a possibility, if that's not something that's going to happen. I need to focus on the things that will help me write the best songs I possibly can. And so my focus should be on learning those technical skills and understanding when to use them in a proper context. When's the right time to switch to a parallel key? When's the right time to use a tritone substitution? There are lots of kind of technical skills and tricks that I'm highly unlikely to stumble across myself. And if I focus on those and learn when to use them in my songwriting, that's going to be of genuine use. But the ability to learn where every A flat on the fretboard is of far less significance, because ultimately when I'm playing, I have an aid in front of me. I have an application called Guitar Tutor, which helps me to visually see all of the useful notes that are going to be available to me. And I've learned over the past few years to actually play in real time, just in the same way that a musician would read sheet music. I can basically read Guitar Tutor and fluidly play over the fretboard without having to worry about memorizing those notes. So I've shortcutted that process, and yet I constantly feel like a fraud. I watch videos where people talk about the laziness of people who just can't be bothered to learn the fretboard. And that kind of drags me down, because I think, well, I'm not a lazy person, but I've never learned the fretboard. Why? And it was literally only yesterday when I realized that the reason why I just don't have the incentive to do that is because the main reason for being that fluid is the ability to collaborate with other people. Now, in a moment, I'm going to talk about some of the aspects of ASD to help you to determine whether or not this is something that you might want to investigate for yourself. Because, as I say, discovering that there was a name for this thing and an explanation for the way that I was a huge relief. To learn that I'm not fundamentally broken and that it's okay to say, I don't want to play with other musicians, was such a weight off my mind. Hopefully, if that's the case for you as well, then this video has been worth making. So let's talk about some of the features of ASD. I've only picked on the ones that actually tick my boxes. There are a couple of aspects of ASD that I don't manifest. For instance, I don't have a physical tic. Many people with ASD do. I have a mental tic. Over the course of a day, I will repeat the number sequence 81546372 somewhere between 50 and 200 times. It's basically an internal mantra that spins in my mind. And what it's essentially doing is helping me to stay calm, to basically keep like a level mental playing field. The earliest I can remember reciting this kind of internal mantra is 12 years old, because when I was 13, I tried to introduce 90 into the sequence. Basically, every combination of numbers adds up to 9. And I tried to add 90 by basically repeating 909090 as many times as I possibly could to catch up to what must have, by that point, have been years worth of cycle already. So maybe I started this thing when I was 8 or 9. I can't exactly remember. But I do this completely without thinking. There's going to be some sort of repetitive pattern in your behavior that's completely unconscious and absolutely compulsive. 1845726 So that's the other thing, that you can invert the numbers, but if you invert 81, you have to invert 54 as well. So I could do 27368154. That's completely fine. So there's any number of combinations to them. If I'm reading words on a page, I could actually count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this stuff is just completely unconscious, spinning all the time. If you have one of these kind of mental or physical tics, then that's a big signpost. Probably the biggest one, and the one why I started making this video in the first place, is that it's very difficult, or more or less impossible, effectively, to make friends or be in social circumstances or in some sort of social environment. Pretty much the worst thing that I can hear is that one of Pauline's friends is getting married, because very shortly after that is going to be we're going to be invited to the wedding, you know. And Pauline understands what a torture that is for me. And depending on who that person is, she might go on her own. I might basically gird my loins and get on with it. And there are situations when, if I'm in that environment, then I can put a pretty effective mask on. And in fact, anybody with whom I'm interacting might not even know there's a problem. But every now and again, I'll catch Pauline looking at me and she'll say, "Are you okay?" And it's like, yeah, I'm doing good. I hold myself together, get out of the situation, and I just kind of mentally collapse. This was a huge problem when I used to be employed. I left work about 2.5 years ago. Up until that point, I was a full-time employee. I had to interact with my fellow employees. In fact, when COVID hit in 2020, that was one of the happiest times of my life because I was legally required to stay at home and not interact with people. When COVID ended and everybody went back to work and we received the instruction from I used to work for BT, the instruction came from the powers that be up above, right, everyone back in the office. That was the final straw that broke my back. And Pauline agreed to basically carry on working and help to support us because I simply couldn't do it. I couldn't go back to work after having been shown what an alternative life looked like. Having to wear that mask every day and interact with people as if you're perfectly normal was so exhausting, but that by the age of 50, 51, I just couldn't do it anymore and I had to stop. This is exactly the same, and this has always been the same with music as well. I've never had the slightest inclination to be in a band. Now, about 10 years ago, my friend Pete formed a Billy Fury tribute band, and he asked me to join. This is another thing, actually. People with ASD do form very close bonds with a tiny number of people, and that number varies. Essentially, for me, it's maybe 4 or 5. Anyway, I got sidetracked. Yep, tribute band, Billy Fury tribute band about 10 years ago. And somehow I managed to end up agreeing to be the lead guitarist in this band. From that point onwards, we engaged in about 12 months worth of rehearsals. Pretty much that entire time, we rehearsed once a week. It was always deeply traumatic. I felt sick just going to the rehearsal. And a couple of times, actually, we were practicing at a local recording studio. And the guy who owned the studio would come in to grab a cable from the back room or, tinker about with some piece of equipment. As soon as he walked into the room, I basically froze like a rabbit in a headlight. So imagine what it would have been like. We actually disbanded before we ever did a paid gig, thank goodness. But it would have been an absolute train wreck because I'd talked myself into this situation, just basically caught myself by surprise and said, because don't forget, I didn't know at this point that I was autistic. I thought I was just kind of lazy and unwilling to try these things. So I forced myself into this situation and it was absolutely terrifying. And one person walking into our rehearsal room was enough to basically turn my mind completely blank. I could no longer functionally play the guitar. So what it would have been like in front of a crowd, I shudder to think that was a really, really close call. And that's the only time I've ever been in a band and we never did a single gig. So an extreme need to be alone with the exception of a very small number of select, hand-picked people. I often come across as blunt to the point of rudeness. Somebody will ask me a question and the polite form of the reply is going to be 7, 8, 9 words long. To me, it's no. And there'll be this long pregnant pause where all of the other words are supposed to be and everybody's wondering why I just said one. It just seems completely obvious that the one-word answer is the correct one. Now, I'm usually aware at these times that I have just come across as being rude. The problem is, and this is a very difficult thing to explain or describe, it's an inability to be any other way. If I actively rein myself in, basically put a stranglehold on myself, I can construct sentences that kind of navigate me through these choppy waters. But it's not a lack of care or thought that causes me to be this way. This is simply fundamentally who I am. And only the very small number of people who actually know me and understand who I am can actually live with this because it can be pretty overbearing. Very similar to the blunt thing is the fact that I take everything absolutely, literally, black and white. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If you say you're going to be somewhere at a particular time, be there at a particular time. My son Alex used to kind of get carried away at school. He'd go to his friend's house after school. If he knew he had to be home at 5 p.m. for tea, he would very often turn up at 4:59 and I would be absolutely fine with that. 5:01, I would be in a towering rage and he would know that he's in serious trouble. The difference between walking through the door at 4:59 and 5:01 was absolutely night and day. Do you have intense and highly focused interests? Well, allow me to introduce you to somebody who's done a 30-odd part series on Hallian or Omnisphere or Cubase or Groove Agent. Yeah, I get pretty intense. If I set out to learn a thing, I absolutely learn it. That's a great joy to me and something that I absolutely wouldn't swap. In fact, I wouldn't swap any aspect of my personality at this point. I've completely come to accept and be at peace with the person that I am. I don't apologize for it anymore. But this is one of the features that I acknowledge is certainly an advantage, because you're going to have a laser focused target on a subject. The problem is developing the interest in that thing in the first place. Going back to learning the fretboard, for instance, I never had a good enough reason to learn the guitar fretboard, so I didn't bother, and I'm still not interested to this day. And it was a pretty cool thing pretty much yesterday to have that moment of revelation, that realization that this is something you can stop worrying about. You don't need to do that thing, move on, find something else to be interested in. Do you hate surprises? I run disaster scenarios and have internal monologues with myself that can last 5, 10, 15 minutes, where I'll basically rehearse an entire possibility. If you obsess about these details so much and draw these kind of imaginary scenarios to such an extent that you're basically very rarely actually surprised, then that's probably an indicator. By the same token, or on the flip side, I suppose, when I am caught out, I am absolutely flawed. I'm very bad at reacting instantly to a misadventure that I haven't anticipated. If it happens, I'm really, really angry with myself because I haven't seen every possible future timeline. Of course, I'm going to be angry with myself an awful lot under those circumstances. And the last one that I'm going to list for you is the hatred of irrational things to hate. Now, I'm going to go through a list here, but this isn't comprehensive. Paper clips, drawing pins, beads, buttons, oval spoons. I can't eat from an oval spoon. I have to eat from a round spoon. Plastic food containers. Oh my God, the thought of eating from a plastic food container is absolutely straight no. That is a hard stop. Some things are just wrong, and the fact that nobody else can see it is irrelevant. I know it's wrong. Does that make any sense, or is it rational? Well, it is to me. I know when something's right or wrong. The fact that the rest of the world disagrees with me is neither here nor there. So if any of this has resonated with you and you feel that sense of hopelessness when somebody on the internet says you're lazy or you're doing it wrong for not doing something that you're simply physically incapable of doing, try to take heart from the fact that you're not alone. I'm finally coming to terms with the fact that there are aspects of being a musician that, because I'm never going to have the possibility of doing them, I'm never going to be incentivized to make those attempts. I'm never going to be incentivized to learn the guitar fretboard. When I have a visual aid in front of me, this is the only place where I write music. So if I've got something on screen that's telling me where those notes are, that's good enough. You take that thing away from me and ask me to play the guitar blind, I'm absolutely hopeless. I just don't know where any of the notes are and it all falls apart. I've stopped worrying about that. That used to be something that really concerned me, and it no longer does. I've simply come to accept that that's part of my ASD. I'm going to take all of the time and energy that I would have spent on that thing and I'm going to direct it somewhere else. And I'm going to love doing that thing because I'm going to be enthusiastic about it, and that's the most important thing. So it's ended up being a bit of a long rambling video. Hope it's been useful to you though. If there's one person out there who feels the same way that I do and some of these things affect them, and if this video helps you in some way to come to terms with it, that would be completely awesome. In the meantime, I'm going to carry on writing my songs and I'm going to have a thoroughly fantastic time doing it. And I'm going to stop worrying about the things that I can't do. Thanks for watching the video. Please hit like if you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.